So, Mr. Glidden, how long have you worked for Yavapai College?
Since 1993.
So, what are some of the circumstances or aspects of Yavapai College that lured you to work here?
Well, my wife was the one who spotted it. I was teaching at a community college in Kentucky, and she, when she noticed that in the, the higher education, whatever, can't even think of the name of it. Anyway, she spotted it, and she said, "Here's a nice place." And I said, "Arizona?" But I remember one time I was hitchhiking outside of Flagstaff, and the cop made me get on the other side of the guardrail, and I was 3 feet deep in snow. So I knew that there was snow in Arizona somewhere. You know, I wasn't sure about Prescott. But when I came out here and interviewed, I was in the St. Michael's Hotel. I came out a week early in order to save money. I was in the St. Michael's Hotel, and I heard this great blues music playing. And I said, "Where is that great blues music coming from?" And instead of, I was afraid I was on the 3rd floor on the back towards Thumb Butte. And instead of going all the way down there, and I thought by the time I got outside on the street, it would be over. So I went out the window, went down the fire escape, and then right across to NOLAZ, I didn't know it was NOLAZ then, right into where they were playing the blues. And it's great, you know, it was from San Diego, great blues band from San Diego. And when they were done playing, I went and called up my wife in Kentucky, and I said, "I don't care if I get the job or not." I said, "We got to come here. They got a great blues club that you could only find 20 years ago." Mm-hmm. So I was more than happy when they accepted me, you know, at Yavapai College.
That's great. Good way to hook you.
Right. Oh, great music.
Now, through some of I guess, research that I was doing at another time, I found out that you were the former student advisor to the college newspaper.
Oh yes.
How did you get involved with the Yavapai College newspaper?
Well, I was a journalist when I was at Center College in Danville, Kentucky, and I'd been writing, you know, all the time since. I've been writing ever since I was a little kid. When I was a little kid, I had my own journal that I wrote for family, friends, and then they went on like that. So I was always interested, and I happened to cover for my school newspaper and for myself the march from Selma to Montgomery, Martin Luther King, in 1965. I caught the last leg of it and reported, took pictures. So I've always been interested in that. And then there was an opening. Someone, I think Don Rawlings, said, "Do you want to be the advisor?" And I said, "You bet." And so I got involved in it. Doreen Daly was the president at that time, and she and I were not always on the best of terms. And the person who was the editor took on an adversarial sort of stance towards the administration. And so she started, you know, bringing some heat down on me. And when we got they started a new thing. There were going to be 3 editors instead of 1, and that was beyond me. But what she did during that last summer that I was the advisor, is she didn't like what the newspaper was doing, what it was saying. But it's a student newspaper. It's supposed to be, you know, run by the students. And so she collected a bunch of, pardon the expression, people from the community who were newspapermen, ex-newspapermen, retired newspapermen, and made a committee. And I had to go down there and sit in front of them. And they quizzed me about everything that was going on. And then when I told them, I said, legally, I am not allowed to see that copy of the newspaper until it comes out, unless they ask me. If they want to show me something, I can see it. I said, but they are free to print whatever they want. And these old newspapermen said, "Oh, no, that's not the law. You got to be able to see everything that they're going to print before they print it." I said, "I've been to New York City twice, and I've gone through the whole, you know, legal ramifications. I am not allowed to see it unless they want me to see it. And if they don't want me to see it," you know, which a lot of things they didn't want me to see because they were coming up with some idiotic, you know, what was that last headline? Yavapai College may be involved in a felony. And when I saw that, I said, now this is as stupid as you can get. Maybe. I said, Yavapai College may be involved in cannibalism, but you don't go say maybe, you know, they could be maybe involved in anything. But of course, that was the last straw for Doreen Daly, so she made this committee, and then she had me in front of it, and they're telling me, oh, you are allowed to see it. And I said, no, you're not. No, you're not. No, yes, you are. And they just said, you're stupid, you don't know stuff. And I threw up my hands, and then when they got these three, had a renegade editor, I said, we're going to have a week-long retreat before the school year starts, and we're going to study a lot of things. And I had the whole thing planned out. And this one editor said, I don't want to do that at the last second. And she called Doreen Daly. And Doreen Daly said, oh, well, if someone calls me, I will answer them, and I want to hear what they have to say like that. So I could see where this was going. She'd cut off my legs, and I said, you know, forget it. That person only lasted another month anyway, and she bailed out of the whole editorial process. So I said, you know, if you're taking away the power that I have, which is to have a retreat and study, you know, what, you know, journalism is about and about being an editor is about, like that, and you're saying this girl doesn't have to attend this thing, then I have no power and there's no sense, you know, you're just pulling the strings. And she had instituted even another newspaper at that time where she printed happy news from the administration, what she wanted out there. Oh, it was just nuts, you know. But that's all right. I wrote her a letter finally. You know, I quit, and I said, you know, I can't do what I'm doing effectively. But I wrote her a letter because there were so many great faculty, and I'm sure Steve Govedich told you that, who had been run off or destroyed or just cowed to pieces, that I finally wrote her a letter to her, and I said, look, unless you change, I'm going to, long letter, I'm going to oppose you with everything that I have. And I said, I am going to call for a, what do you call it?
No confidence.
Vote of no confidence. And so at the next faculty meeting, if my memory is right, I remember somebody was sitting next to me, and I said, okay, I said, when are we going to have a no confidence vote? And he said, why don't you bring it up? And I stood up and I said, when are we going to have a vote of no confidence? And other things had been going on. I wasn't the spearhead person, but we finally got into a no confidence thing. And it finally, you know, for one way or another, it toppled her. Okay, and she was out. Thanks be to God that you can't believe the difference in the spirit of the college before she left. Those last, you know, 4, 5, 6 years, you know, she was just crushing it down and down and down and down. And I'm just amazed that she hasn't been brought up for charges, you know. With private investigators going in people's offices, you know, and you know, going through their files and everything like that. I don't know how she got out the way she did, you know. But thanks be to God, she's gone. Thank God and Greyhound. And things are so much better now.
That's what I've heard.
Right.
That's what a lot of people feel, which is great. Now you're also involved in Alcoholics Anonymous on campus. How did you become involved with that?
Well, now there is something that I cannot talk about. Okay, I can't talk about that.
Okay.
All right.
No problem. Now you've kind of hinted before, and then I've also heard from another one of your colleagues that you've thumbed a few rides in your day. I can talk about my alcoholism, but I can't talk about what you just asked me about. You see, in press, radio, and film, you're not to discuss. I guess I could talk about a 12-step program, but I can talk about nothing in conjunction with that. Okay? Oh.
So you're free to ask me whatever you want, but except for that relationship. Right?
Okay. Yeah. No problem.
Right.
Wasn't aware.
Hitchhiking.
Yeah. So
yes.
What gave you kind of a passion for hitchhiking? Why did you start doing that?
I started, I think, when I was a little kid. I'd hitchhike out to Lake Antoine in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. You know, just a few miles out of town, but that was a small town, and there was no problem. And then when I think I was 14 or 15 years old, I hitchhiked up 300 miles to my oldest, one of my older sister's homecoming, because I didn't have the money to take the bus, and then hitchhike back. And I just loved it right away. I loved the different people that you'd meet going hitchhiking, and you know, it was only after the fact that I ever read anything about people who had hitchhiked and wrote about it. I just loved being able to go anywhere, you know, that you wanted to for free, you know, and you know, then, you know, it was interesting. When I did sober up, I was afraid that I would never be able to go hitchhiking again. This was in the 80s. You know, I hitchhiked from, let's say, 1960 to 19, you know, till I sobered up. I was hitchhiking. Even when I had a car, a lot of times I would hitchhike somewhere because I loved to, you know, all the different kind of people that I'd run into. And kind of every trip would take on its own. You didn't know where it was going, you know. It was like, you know, this is really interesting. And somehow I always seemed to be sort of, like I hitchhiked down to, you know, Montgomery, Alabama to cover that, in 1965, to cover the march, Martin Luther King. And the last guy who picked me up said, "You're not going down there to march with that nigger king, are you?" And I said, no. He said, "Because if you were, I'd take you for a ride out in the woods and you wouldn't come back." And he had about 3 guns in his car, and I figured he would. So I lied my way in and out of that town. But I was afraid when I sobered up, I wouldn't be able to ever hitchhike again. And then I realized, hey, I can live one day at a time without a drink. I can take one ride at a time, and if they got booze or drugs, I can just say no. So one of the first things I did in 1982 was I hitchhiked up to Seattle from Oklahoma, in order to kind of, you know, say I was sorry to some people about some things I did. And I slept under the bridge where I used to sleep under when I was, you know, didn't have a place, didn't have a door to shut. And hitchhiked all the way back and had a great time. And then in '83, I hitchhiked up to Canada from Oklahoma. And in '85, I hitchhiked back up. I hitchhiked up to Montreal and Quebec, and then back to Grand Manan Island, where I took my sabbatical years later. In '87, I hitchhiked all the way to St. John's, Newfoundland. I took a ferry from Nova Scotia to Newfoundland, but I hitchhiked 500 miles across Newfoundland and 500 miles back to the ferry again, like that. So, and in the 90s, when I got married in '89, my wife and I hitchhiked around England, Ireland, and Scotland. So I haven't hitchhiked anywhere much lately for a while, but that's because I got kids.
Yeah, understandable. It's harder to hitchhike with kids out here.
Right. I'd like to try it sometime, though. I bet you get rides right away.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Just like when you carry a gas can.
Right.
So, what precipitated you to kick alcohol and sober up?
Well, my liver was almost gone. I had had 4 pancreatic attacks, and I had thrown up blood, and blood had come out of every orifice in my body. So, and they told me that I wasn't going to live, you know, another month if I kept drinking. And so I finally got down on my knees and I said, "God, I'm ready to do anything to stay clean and sober." And once I did that, then the doors and windows started opening up. I thought there was no hope for me to stop drinking. But once I did that, then one day at a time, that's how I've been working it.
Now tell me something about some of the writing you've done, like with children's books and stories and such.
Okay. Yeah, I've written stories for all 3 of my kids. Some of my things have been published, and I got a whole mess of stuff sitting in a heap that hasn't been published yet that I'm waiting to have enough time. Like this summer, I've written a thing on Charlie Musselwhite. It's book length. Charlie Musselwhite is a blues harmonica player. And when I got out of the Army in '68, I was drafted into the Army in '66. And when I got in '68, I went up to Madison, Wisconsin, where there was a lot of anti-war activity, and I got into all the riots and demonstrations I could get into, and I was writing about them. I was taking pictures still, and movie pictures, And then I was taking pictures at the Nitty Gritty, a blues club, and they had all the old bluesmen coming up there, Muddy Waters and Otis Spann and Buddy Guy and Junior Wells and Charlie Musselwhite. And one night after they were buying my pictures and putting them up on the wall, these 11 by 14 black and whites. And one night after about a month doing that, the owner called me up and said, Otis Spann is in town and he needs a place to stay. He's going to be playing. Can you put him up? And I don't know who your favorite recording artist is, but what if somebody called you and said, could this person stay at your house? And you say, yeah, I'll sleep in the snow, let this person have my bed, whatever. Yeah. So Otis Spann was the greatest blues piano player, and he was Muddy Waters' blues piano player for 20 years. And so he and his wife and his band stayed with me. They stayed with me 4 times. And then when I'd go down to Chicago, the South Side, I'd go over to his place and have had to go to his parties at his place and have a wild time. To be a white person on the South Side of Chicago was something. And I wrote about that, and that was later published in Blues Review. But I've been writing a thing on Charlie Musselwhite, and I'm going to kind of rework the article that I sent out, and which was refused, and see if I can't get that published with a kind of a tagline that says, part of an excerpt from the book on Charlie Musselwhite, which includes, all kinds of pictures too. So I'm just biding my time and doing what I can when I can. Being a composition teacher, film literature and composition at Yavapai College, it's intensive, and during the semester, and the best I can do is write during the summer and maybe a little bit during Christmas break. There's no time, unless I want to give up my family, and I'm not willing to do that.
Great. Good luck with that.
Thank you.
You mentioned your sabbatical in Maine. What prompted you to take the sabbatical?
Well, as I said, in 1983, I was a carpenter at that time. I had not gone back to school at that time. I mean, when I sobered up in Norman, Oklahoma, I said, wow, there's a university here. That's interesting. Maybe I'll take a night class. And I think I took a night class. And as fate would have it, that fellow would become my mentor. That professor would become my mentor. And he's still my friend today. And he's quite a famous author himself. I was a carpenter at that time still, and I hitchhiked up to St. John, New Brunswick. Now, see, there's a St. John's, Newfoundland, and a St. John, New Brunswick. And I spent a week there just because I'd never been there. I'd been to Maine, but I'd never been to New Brunswick. And on my way back, somebody was giving a picnic on this island in the Bay of Fundy, where they have the highest tides in the world. And I went to this island, and at this picnic, I met this fellow and his family. He's a fisherman, and he said, "If you ever come back here," he said, "I'll take you out I'll take you out fishing, going for scallop and whatever else he was going for." So in '85, I hitchhiked up there, and stayed with him for 2 weeks, and he took me out. We went out on the ocean fishing, and then I went back to that island in '87 and '88. And then I just kind of would write to him every now and then. It's a beautiful island, 14 miles long, 6 miles wide. It's 2,500 people, really only one road down one side of the island, just a few little fishing villages, really quaint and really out of the way. And so when I finally got permission to take a sabbatical, my wife and I and the family wanted to go to Wales, but the dollar was devalued, so at the last minute I called up there. I thought he was dead by that time. I figured, man, the way he smokes, everybody smokes on that island. He's got to be dead. But I called him, and I said, "Is there anything for rent up there?" And he said, "Well, my daughter's got a house right on the ocean, for rent." And he said, "But she wants $500 a month." I said, "I think we can swing that, like that." So glad it wasn't more. And so we spent over a year there. I was writing, on a rigid schedule every day, writing and then being with my family, and no phone, no internet, No cell phone, you know, no TV, nothing, you know, just watching the tides go up. In every 6 hours, the tide would either go down 26 feet or go up 26 feet. So that means whole bays would empty out. You'd go down, there's one grocery store, one hardware store, one drugstore, and you'd drive, you know, 14 miles to the grocery store, and you'd get your groceries, and you'd drive back, and as you're going down, you know, sometimes the creeks would be flowing one way, you know, as the ocean came back in, and on your way back, be going the other way, and whole bays would empty out, and the boats would, you know, either go down and sit on the bottom, or they would be far enough out on the dock so they would just go down 26 feet. You understand, like that? It was a great place to go. It's a Canadian island, but it is closer to Maine than it is to Canada. But it's a 2-hour ferry, an ocean-going ferry ride to get out there. So it's really, really a world apart, and those people are different than they're island people. Everybody, doesn't matter whether you're from just on the harbor, Black's Harbor, where the other ferry hits going the other way, or whether you're from Australia, you're from away. See, are they from the island or are they from away? You know. So I was from away.
Sounds great.
Yep.
Definitely kind of an Annie Dillard sort of seclusion.
Yes, right. Absolutely, absolutely.
That's great. So you're also a bit of a baseball fan, I hear. Who's your favorite team?
Well, I was a Brooklyn Dodger fan. Goes way back, you know, to the Duke Snyder and all those. My friends were I was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and they were either Milwaukee Braves fans or Chicago Cubs fans or Detroit Tigers fans. And I was 8 and 9 years old, and I hadn't picked a team yet. And so I loved baseball, though, and so I got my first pack of Topps cards. And this is fate, because I opened it up, and there was Duke Snyder. And I said, Duke Snyder, what a name, Brooklyn Dodgers. So I went down to the library, I got 10 books on the Brooklyn Dodgers, took them home and read them one after another. And one of those books was, 3 of the books were on Jackie Robinson. And see, when they would throw the ball at Jackie Robinson, spike him, spit on him, threaten to kill him, and all those things, it wasn't out of virtue it wasn't because he was a black man, it's because how could they do this to a Dodger? You know, I became an instant Dodger fan. And then, because there wasn't a black person within 230 miles of Iron Mountain where I grew up, you know, but when we moved and went to high school down in Wisconsin, it was a German, very enclosed. There were only 82 in my graduating class, but I got the president of the NAACP for our senior project. This is the time when the civil rights bills were up before Congress in '63 and '64, after Kennedy was slain, and so he was the first black person ever to set foot in Slinger High School. Our principal would not even shake hands with him, and would not invite him to lunch, which, you know, anybody else he would have, like that. But he got up there, and he opened my mind too, because in those days, you know, you saw black people as either as musicians or athletes, and he got up there in front and he said, before I begin to speak, he said, I'd like to introduce you to my beautiful wife. And so the whole student body turned around, you know, maybe 400 students, turned around, and there was this black woman sitting back there. And I had never thought of a black woman as beautiful before, because it was never presented. You know, even all the Playboy playmates at that time were white. And, you know, any adolescent at that time, you're trying to get a hold of Playboy like that. But all the beautiful women in movies, all the beautiful women in advertisements, all the beautiful women on TV were white. And I thought, she is beautiful. You know, and it never occurred to me before. So, you know, that baseball card of Duke Snyder got me to Jackie Robinson, got me to the sort of thinking about things, got me to marching with Martin Luther King Jr. down in Montgomery, and got me into the blues, you know, the blues clubs and all these great Chicago blues. Oh, after Otis Spann, there was, all these Muddy Waters bands stayed with me, and I said Muscle White's band stayed with me, Fast Fingers Dawkins, one after another, these great old blues, most of them are dead now and gone, but they stayed with me, and for 4 years, and I thought it was never going to end, Muscle White's band stayed with me 14 times. Every time they come to Madison, they'd stay with me. So that's why I've kept up this enduring relationship with Muscle White. He sobered up too, after I did.
Really?
Yeah.
And anywhere today, if the president of the NAACP showed up, so would the whole press corps, and
right.
Everyone would turn out for that sort of thing. You'd have to pull some strings to take him to lunch.
Right. Oh, yeah, right. What a difference. What a difference from that time and this time. When I went to Center College in 1964, here's a college that goes back to 1806, and that was the first year they integrated. And they brought in, 1 male and 2 females, and very specially handpicked, just like Jackie Robinson. Martin Luther King said, without Jackie Robinson, you'd never heard of me. Because Jackie Robinson brought that visual, here's a black man playing the white man's game, supposed to be closed like that. And it opened all kinds of minds like that. And at the movie theater in Danville, Kentucky, where Center College was, the blacks all were up in the balcony, up above. I could go up and sit in the balcony, which I did, but no black person could go down there and sit below. And they had even stranger stuff than this. They had black barbers who just did white customers. You understand? And so when they tried to integrate, when they tried, the black barber said, "No, we'll lose all our business," and they did. It's kind of sad. The kind of reverse sort of things. Everybody wanted to keep status quo, but you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs.
Quite true.
Yeah.
Quite true. Now you also teach film at the school here. If you could make everyone watch 5 films,
wow.
What would they be?
Okay, I guess one would be Andrei Rublev by Tarkovsky. Great Russian, real poet. His father was the poet laureate of the USSR, and he became this insidious artist who brought, all this beautiful poetic spirituality into his movie. He took 2001 and made Solaris, and beautiful. But I would say Andrei Rublev by Tarkovsky. I would say Diary of a Country Priest by Robert Bresson, the great French director. I would say Ikiru by Akira Kurosawa. Brilliant film. Brilliant film. Kurosawa's. It's hard to think of anybody who could, by and large. I would say Grapes of Wrath by John Ford. La Strada by Fellini. La Strada. I'm not a big Fellini fan. He's a great director, but La Strada is a thing apart. And of course there's so many other films, but that's what I would say, 5 films.
Cool. I must say that I've only seen one of those 5, so I'll have to What are some of your favorite aspects of Yavapai College?
The people, first of all, the people. I've been to a number of different schools. I've taught, at the University of Oklahoma. I taught at Somerset Community College in Kentucky, and I've taught here. I also interviewed at a bunch of schools all over the United States, and I've gone to different schools where I've witnessed the way that the English department or communications department, whatever it's called, the way they... And almost all of those other places were like a den of snakes, that these ego-mad people only came out to bite each other from time to time. This department here, under the great Don Rawlings and the people who came after him, continue to this day. It was just an incredible department. Carol Hammond, Joni Fisher, Jenny Fimmler. I wish I had the list in front of me, but there's people who have been there for some time. Just great people, great teachers, and always interesting people. These new people who might not stay forever, but they would come and they'd bring some ideas. but we really tried to listen to each other and really tried to work, and we really got to know each other. We went to pains to really know each other, and when there were serious issues on this campus, it was the English department, because it was the biggest department, that really got together and stood together almost as one, in the face of adversity, and which happened before I even got here in '93. So the people, and then this campus has gotten more beautiful. I mean, I went and interviewed at campuses that were in, trailers. They were in trailers, or they rundown school that some high school had abandoned, or some, or just one great big room with dividers and things like that. But I also saw some beautiful schools too. But it was the people, and the setting is excellent, and now this college gets more beautiful every year. That's one thing Doreen Daly did for us. She really expanded the campus, and it's really starting to look like something.
The parking lot could use some work, but
looks good from the air.
And I've also been told that you're an incredibly generous person, especially when it comes to the homeless and the poor. What kind of I guess gives you the passion to help those less fortunate than yourself?
I was homeless, and you know what? I remember every person who did something beautiful for me. They knew they weren't getting a thing back for it. All over the United States, where I would be, when I was homeless, and somebody would go out of their way, to help me, or take me home, or feed me, or give me some money, even when they knew, it was going into booze or whatever like that. One time, I remember it was in Wisconsin. I was hitchhiking, and I was, broke. Absolutely broke, and this old man and these two old women on their way to church stopped and picked me up. And they're only taking me about 5 miles, but the two women started digging in their purses, and they kept heaping change and change. $4.73, I'll never forget that, of change. And they kept digging and digging, trying to give me all the change. They knew where I was going. I stunk like alcohol. I knew I was just reeking of alcohol, like that. And I knew where I was going. They knew where I was going. But they wanted to do something to help me, and they didn't know how else to help me. So in '98, when my church, I always was trying to work with the homeless, but when my church moved out of town, and I said, how can you help people downtown who are down and out when you're way outside of town? And they said, in 20 years the center of town will be out there. And I said, what do they do in the meantime for the next 20 years? So I said, I knew I had to do something right out of the gospel. And I remember Jesus said, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was sick and in jail, you came and visited me. So I said, I got a couple of my friends together, and I said, and my wife, and we went down, and all we had was potato salad and hot dogs the first Saturday. So we put up a couple signs, if you're hungry on Saturday, come down. So we started that, and that was 10 years ago, and now we usually get about 125 to 150 people on Saturday who come to eat. Now, none of those people, at least the way things are now, although things may change, we may be going into a deep depression, who knows. None of those people would starve to death, if they missed that one meal like that. And there's other people who do this, and bless them like that. But, they have always, they're kind of like a family. We get together, and we have this meal together, and we eat too. It isn't like, we're on our side and we're on the giving side, you're on the taking side. We eat the food with them, we get to know them, we talk to them. They often help us, we help them like that. And the people who work together also, I've thought about it, if I were to die today, I started making a list of the people I'd want to be pallbearers, and almost all of them are people, from the Saturday feed, like that. So, I mean, it's a great healing and a blessing for me to be there every Saturday. And you got all these great old ladies who are great cooks who bring their home cooked food down there. It's a bit. I hope my wife doesn't see this. It's you know, those old ladies, they know how to cook, you know. They're falling off the end of the world, you know. All people know how to do is throw stuff in a microwave. Of course, anybody can pick up a cookbook and learn to cook at any minute they want. But there's some great food down there. And it's open to anybody. You don't have to be homeless or down and out. You can come and eat there, you know. So come on down and join us.
That's great. Fantastic. Well, I guess the last question is back to Yavapai College. As the college is now, many of the faculty now believe it's as good or better than it ever has been. But if you could change one thing for the better about Yavapai College, what might that be? Or what's one thing you can think of, I guess?
Oh, well, first I'll agree that, I miss people who have, you know, have retired or who have died. And there's some things that have come and gone, and some programs have changed, and they've moved the goalposts a little bit on some other things. But, you know, if there was one thing I would change, it would be that there would be more getting together of the faculty, staff, and I think we've lost a little bit, although they still do it. I think that we knew each other where we, you know, there's been so many moving. I didn't know where Thatcher went, you know. I knew he was over there, and he was over there, and he was over there, and I didn't know where he went. So I'm grateful for this interview that I found out where they put him. But I think it would be just to try to get us together for retreats and things like that, to share inter-department and like that, so, you know, we get to know each other, because I get to know the, you know, people in and out of other departments, but I don't know what's happened to some people. I just saw Lucy McGuire, and I haven't seen her for a long time, and that's probably my fault, but I'm working about as hard as I can and still holding on. But we just had a faculty retreat in our division, our department, this last week, and it was great because we got to sit down and break bread together and talk, get to know each other, and I think that's more important than you know, the numbers and stuff like that. It's more important that we know each other, so we really have a sense of that community. So that's all I'd say.
Sounds fitting for community college.
Right, exactly.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was a fantastic interview.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
All right.